Hello and welcome to I'm Alice podcast, and we're talking about connection, creativity, and how we find clarity through our ever-changing world that we live in. So we're talking about transformation and change. So welcome to this edition of I Am Alice podcast. I hope you enjoy it. So, welcome, Donna Grace, to I'm Alice podcast. And we generally talk about creativity, connection, and how we find clarity in this sort of ever-changing world that we're living in. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
And we're going to talk about astrology today, many different aspects. But yeah, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, Donna, first.
Sure, thank you. My name's Donna Grace. I'm a healer, and it's not a word I use lightly, but I guess astrology is something that I've been learning now for the past 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my first introduction to astrology really went back to my first spiritual awakening, which is when I was 19. And I'd just come out of a 2.5-year stint of anorexia, which I came out the same way I went in through my own process of healing, which mainly involved prayer, really, because that's really all I knew at that age. I didn't know much else about the spiritual journey. So astrology piqued my interest then. But yeah, so I then just read books over the years, and then in the year 2000, I met a guy in Adelaide who did astrological counselling.
Right.
And I was really just fascinated, about how powerful it was, how accurate it seemed in terms of explaining the cycles that were happening in my life at the time. And he also was a teacher. In fact, he was the founder of the Australian Astrological Society. So he had all the right textbooks and everything. And so I went into a course with him for 6 months, and I learned the language of astrology, should we say, because it is a language.
And it's more than just your sun sign.
Absolutely.
As I now know.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about astrology, but yeah, it's about where your moon's placed, where your rising sign, and it's all about the cycles of life, isn't it? The different ages and what goes through.
Yeah.
And it can tell us a lot about our lives and, help, sort of decide maybe what we're going to do as a career or something. And about our relationships and families and also, like you said, about world events earlier. So maybe just tell us a little bit about how it can help us in our personal relationships.
Sure. So basically, just to explain what astrology is, it's an ancient wisdom, pretty much. And it's been around since early Greek, Babylonian times. So there's ancient astrology and there's modern astrology, basically. But to me, what I say when I talk about astrology is it explains our connection to the universe we live in, that we're not separate from it, but that we're part of it. So we as humans are actually cosmic beings. Do you know what I mean? So we recognize, for example, that the tides from the oceans affect the moon, and our bodies are made up of water. So therefore, that's just a simple correlation. So basically, what happens at the time of your birth, you can take a snapshot of where the different planets are, and according to the constellations that they're in, we say the stars. I mean, you've heard the term the stars. So the 12 zodiac signs are actually constellations of stars.
Right.
That's what they are. So at the time of your birth, the sun was in a particular constellation. The moon was in either the same or another constellation. And basically, in modern Western astrology, which is the astrology that I use, I have studied a little bit of Vedic as well. So the difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology is Western astrology is taken from a geocentric perspective, so it's taken from the perspective of Earth, whereas Vedic astrology is actually taken from the actual constellation configurations in the sky. So that's the fundamental difference between the two. So with Western astrology, it's basically the sun is the central figure for you. Okay, so at the time of your birth, it was in a particular zodiac sign, and each of the 12 zodiac signs has a archetype, has like archetypal energy, and all of them are a blend of masculine and feminine energies. Okay, so it's like there's the light and the dark, the light and the shadow. And so what astrology can really help you to do is to understand your own psyche. It helps us to understand our own psyche, our personality, and things like this. So basically you have the sun, and then in the Western astrology, we have the sort of the 10 planets includes the sun, even though it's not really a planet. It includes 10 planets, right? So each of those other planets it's like imagine that you're having a play and you're on a stage and you've got all the different actors and they all have different roles. And that's how the planets act in our lives. Okay. So to make it fairly simple, the sun is like our central focus, ourselves, who we are, the central focus of our life at this time. And then the moon is more about the internal self, your inner life, your emotions, that type of thing. And then we look, there's when you draw up a birth chart at the time of someone's birth, it's a circle. And if you divide that into 4, there's like 2 axes that are very important when we look at astrology. One of the access points is what we call the ascendant descendant point. And you've probably heard the term ascendant and rising signs. Now, they're the same thing. A lot of people get those confused.
Okay, right.
But a rising and an ascendant are the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And it's very important because the sun and the moon and the ascendant make up what's called the foundation of a person.
Right.
Okay. So when you look at those positions, which zodiac signs they are in, which zodiac, say, for example, the sun is, for me, my sun is in Pisces and my moon is in Sagittarius. So we look at the element. So Pisces is a water sign and the moon in Sagittarius is a fire sign. And we start to get an idea of, the foundation of me, like the Pisces, some of the attributes of Pisces are pretty laid back. It's what's called the oldest sign of the zodiac because it's the 12th zodiac. So it sort of makes up a combination of all the previous signs before it. So it can be quite a complicated sign because it's quite a deep, and Pisces energy is quite deep. And each zodiac sign has a ruling planet, which I won't go into too deeply into. But so yeah, my sun is like, I'm naturally interested in mystical or spiritual things because Pisces is a very spiritual, relates to spirituality, which has made my interest in spirituality. But my moon being in a fire sign, which is my inner self, it's like the way I process my emotions. In a fire sign, it's obviously quite contradictory to the water, but I'm blessed to have it, to be honest. But yeah, so my fiery energy is basically emotionally I'm fiery, and it's true. I can fire up. You know what I mean? Even though I'm usually most of the time chilled, I can certainly fire up. So then we have a look at the ascendant as well, and the ascendant is basically your personality. It's how when someone meets you, they meet your ascendant.
Right.
They don't actually meet your sun sign.
Okay.
So if somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, hi, what sign are you?" I always hesitate personally, and I go, people rarely guess mine. Right. Because I don't present as a Pisces. I present as my rising sign, which is Gemini, which is chatty and flirty and, mercurial, quick, because in my speed, So yeah, just understanding that triad can be really helpful because there can be contradictions in that that we have to then sort of manage within ourselves.
Well, it helps us understand ourselves more.
Correct. When we understand our true nature, because this is our true nature. These things, whilst we do evolve, and astrology also is a tool that can be used to have a look at how we evolve, like year by year, you can do things called like a solar return chart. There's also something called a progress chart because basically the sun moves 1 degree every year in a person's life, technically. I won't go too much into that. But so it's a really powerful tool to really understand your basic fundamental psyche. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I'm pretty chilled. I definitely have a passion for all things esoteric, mystical, which is very Pisces, but I also have a really big drive. And the Sagittarian energy is quite a warrior energy. Sagittarians like to fight to the bow and arrow. It's and people don't necessarily see that about me, but when they meet that side of me, it's like, yeah, it's definitely that. And the Gemini sort of is, as I said, how people meet me. They meet me as that I'm generally chatty. I'm easy to get along with. Gemini is also quite an intelligent sort of energy as well, because the natural ruler, every zodiac sign has a natural planet or a planet that rules it. So the natural ruler of Gemini is Mercury, which is about the mind. So usually people with Gemini rising will have some.
So are there any tips that you can give people about how to use astrology in relationships?
Yeah,
because
definitely.
we all want to
Definitely.
probably be in a relationship or have been in relationships,
Definitely.
and obviously maybe looking back you can see maybe why they didn't get on so well, because we find out what's going on in their chart and what stars, signs they are, and what rulers they have, and then we realize why it suddenly comes to an end.
Yes.
So that's our learning curve. But yeah, how can you share some information about your tools?
So it's actually one of my favorite subjects. It's called synastry astrology because I use it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what happens is we're all energy, and even looking at a chart, when we understand the archetypes for the planets and everything, that's the energy. So when we meet somebody, we bring our energy in combination with somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of ways to look at it. There's what we call synastry, which is where we look at one person's planets compared to another person's planets,
Mm-hmm.
and see if they flow well together.
Mm-hmm. Or put them on top of each other.
If there's more challenging. Yes, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or if there's what we call challenging aspects.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say at this point that astrology is not necessarily this. For example, I have a twin brother.
Mm-hmm.
So our charts are literally 2 minutes apart. So obviously the signs are the same, very similar. And I've studied a lot of charts, and having him that he has a twin brother has been perfect for my learning.
Yeah.
Because our choices have been so different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it explains the energy, but then we all have free will to make choices. And I'm saying that because of a relationship that I was recently in. So basically, you definitely want to have a look at the two ascendants, because that's your personalities. So if somebody's got like a strong fiery personality and the other one's water, it might be a bit like, how's that actually going to work? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Because that's really fundamental, I find. Mm-hmm. Personally, I've really found that to look at is the two ascendants. Are they compatible with each other? For example, earth and water tend to be quite compatible with each other. Air and fire tend to be quite compatible. And in the language of astrology, the air and fire signs are more of a masculine energy, and the water and earth are more of a feminine, or they are feminine energy. So that's why we're all a blend of masculine and feminine. So the first thing you have a look at is the synastry, and definitely check that ascendant out. That's really important. Mm-hmm. And then there's certain aspects within that are very favorable.
Right.
Like that you can look at that will determine a strong relationship. For example, a woman's sun, like for example, if your sun is in Taurus, if you meet a man with moon in Taurus, and the degrees are similar, close enough to each other, even if they're not close, it's still a good combination, because it's like his emotions are going to meet you.
Yeah, they're going to match.
Correct. And that's one of the most, what we call, powerful synastry aspects. So that's a really good one to look for.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to have a look at the whole chart, but mainly what we call the personal planets. So besides the sun and the moon, which we've already talked about, there's Mercury, Venus, and Mars. They're your personal planets. So you want to have a look at the combination of those mainly, how they interact with each other. For example, I recently had like a lot of chemistry with somebody I met, and his Mars was in exact. So his Mars was at 23 degrees of Scorpio, and my Venus was at 23 degrees of Aquarius. So two fixed, what we call fixed signs. This is that the exactness of that is the strongest chemistry you're ever going to get. That when it's an exact squares in what we call synastry astrology are very strong, but when they're exact, the more close the degrees are to each other, the more powerful that aspect is. And it was so powerful, but you have to have a look at the whole chart, because there's many layers to look at. But the synastry is one aspect. The other thing you can do is what's called a composite chart, which is where you take the two charts together and take what's called the midpoints of each of the planets and make a chart of its own. So that creates what's like the chart of the relationship, what that looks like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So really, you have to have a personal reading for this.
You
Yeah,
do. I mean, you do to really get sort of a deeper understanding
Sure.
of what's going
So
on.
what about talking about more world events? Because obviously people do astrology of countries and just generally the the ups and downs of the cycles of not just the planet and how that affects astrology. So maybe you could speak to the idea about the world events and how we are at the moment, because it feels like we're in a very strong place of change these last couple of years. And I think it's undeniable.
Yes.
And and coming up to this year, more change, I'm guessing. I'm hearing. But I don't know if you can speak something around that subject.
Definitely.
That'd be great to hear.
I mean, one of the major benefits I think that astrology can really help people with is to understand the cycles that they're experiencing. For example, somebody might be experiencing a lot of hardship in one area of their life, and the chances are that maybe the planet Pluto is aspecting one of the houses within their chart, and the outer planets move very slowly. So, for example, the planet Pluto takes 248 years to orbit the sun, so it spends 20 years in one sign. So it can be a slow and steady. I mean, Pluto's about transformation. So people might be thinking, why is all this going on? Because when Pluto comes through, it literally, it's like it'll come and tear things down back to its bare minimum. It's like putting somebody in the middle of a field and stripping them down to absolutely nothing, back to the bare basics. So soul, basically.
So are we in Pluto? Is Pluto making effects at the moment? Is it what's going on?
So I've written down because
great.
There is a show I would encourage people to watch on YouTube. It's called Changes of the God, and it talks actually about the history of the outer planets. Predominantly, it talks about Uranus and Pluto. And there's so many intelligent people in the field of astrology. There's this one guy called one guy called Richard Tarnas, who is a professor of psychology and philosophy from California University. He's now in his 70s, and he didn't want to become an astrologer. Back then, when he was at university, he just went somewhere and somebody introduced him, and he got fascinated and went, this seems to make sense, and sort of it evolved on from that. So he's written a couple of famous books, and he's in this show on YouTube called Changes of the God.
Okay, we can put that.
For sure. And one of his books is called Cosmos and Psyche. So he did a lot of research into the history of predominantly the planets Uranus and Pluto. Do you know what I mean? What happens when what they call an aspect to each other?
Right.
So an aspect to each other, because it's all about degrees. It's all very mathematical degrees and numbers.
Yeah.
So to keep it simple, in astrology, there's what we call a conjunction, which is when the two planets are together right next to each other. That's very powerful. The other one we look at is an opposition, when they're directly opposite each other, 180 degrees away from each other. So in opposite zodiac signs. And the other one is a square, which is 90 degrees.
Right.
Those are the main ones that you look at when you look back through history. So we've basically, here on Earth at the moment, we've been going through a major transformation really since 2007.
Right.
And in the show Changes of the God, they showed this fabulous graph actually, where you can see where it peaks, and there's an overlap of these three different aspects that are going on. So Uranus was square Pluto from 2007 to 2020. So that aspect tends to take 12 years as well. So this is where, like, Uranus, just to give you brief, Uranus is the planet that relates to reform. It's about very things that are unpredictable. It's about new innovations. It's about technology. It relates to breakthroughs, innovation, just everything, just new and exciting, basically, but not necessarily predictable, like very unpredictable. Basically. So it can shake. It's they call it the awakener. It shakes things up. When Uranus comes along, it shakes things up. Yeah.
And sometimes we need a shake up.
Well, exactly. And this is why we have to go through this, because we have to evolve. I mean, the whole process is about our evolution
and contrast.
Correct.
Because otherwise life would be very samey. Yeah. So we need to have these.
We came here to grow.
Exactly.
At the end of the day. Yeah. So Uranus and then Pluto is the planet, as I said, of transformation, of death and rebirth, of you know, it's also the underworld. It relates to that. It relates to some deep, dark things as well, to the depth of the soul. It's like the soul of the planet.
And also the unseen world, maybe? The unseen world?
Unseen world's probably more Neptune.
Oh, okay.
It's more the underworld.
Right, the underworld.
Do you know what
the
I mean?
underbelly.
Yeah, the underbelly, like it's where the darkness can be. There's it's probably the greatest shadow is in Pluto. And Pluto is also known as the ruler of Scorpio, and Scorpio's well known for its shadow side. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so we've had this influence. So it's about breaking old patterns, really. Political, societal, economical, ecological events, the whole thing. So for the past 5.5 years, Uranus has been in the zodiac sign of Taurus. So let me explain that briefly. So Uranus, as I said, it's about reform, revelation, awakening, new exciting ideas. And Taurus is a zodiac sign that relates to the earth. It's definitely about the earth. It's an earth sign. It also relates to the food we grow. It relates to our resources, how we get our resources, being the food. Also, it relates to banking and money. It's very much related to money. And when you think about it, those areas globally have been going through change. They've been up for review.
Yeah.
We've got the new cryptocurrencies and everything getting more
predominant.
Yeah, people are sort of noticing them more. So yeah, so that's just an example of how you can really see it playing out, that this planet in this zodiac sign is really, happening. The other thing to look at is Pluto has been in Capricorn for the past 20 years. So as I said, Pluto is death and transformation. It comes along and it just rips out the old. It's like, no, this is not working anymore. We need to change it for the people. How do we change it for the whole of humanity? And in the zodiac sign of Capricorn, Capricorn's also an earth sign. So once again, it's 3D orientated. But Capricorn relates to governments, large corporations, things like this. So this is what it's religion, anything that's a mass scale, basically, that's large, large organizations, large religious whatever I don't know the word to use. So all of these things are being broken down over this past 20 years. And so as we're in we've just come into Aquarius in the last week or so, really. And we're going to stay in here. We'll have a very short stint. Pluto will go back into Aquarius later this year in September, just for 2.5 months. And then it'll be that Pluto will then be in an air sign, no longer in an earth sign. And that we'll probably see a lot of uprise in this next breaking, as it's the last bit of this breaking down of the old ways, of this top-down hierarchy that we've had, where the boss is sitting up here and everybody else is sitting down here. This is what's being stripped away, and it's taken a long time. But as we're getting to this last bit, there's a lot of people that are holding on to wanting to have it the old way.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's going to probably be a little bit of upheaval, I think, because the zodiac sign Aquarius relates to individuality. So it's like the people are rising as people, as individuals. We no longer want to be governed by a government. We want we want to be able to make our own decisions. And we want to work together in harmony, because also Aquarius relates to humanity, working together as a humanity, groups of people. So yeah, that's sort of a big shift that's happening this year. But you all know about the famous event of COVID, right? I mean, COVID, if we look at, all of the astrologers around the world were talking about what was going to be happening in January of 2020. Everyone was talking about it.
I wasn't listening.
Amongst astrologers, it was like, because we can't predict exactly what's going to happen.
No.
We just know what the energy is. And it's like, okay, so what is going to go on? And so, for example, it is the planet Saturn. So Saturn relates to things that are traditional. It relates to structure and form. It relates to restrictions, constrictions. It's time as well, actually. It's about time. So it's very much the hard taskmaster of the zodiac. It's the coldest planet. So it's very cold. It's not warm. you know, it's a cold energy. So Saturn was conjunct Pluto at the time. And when we look back in history, the last time that occurred was 1789 in the French Revolution.
Right.
So if you look back over history, you start to see the correlations and the themes that happened when certain planets were together. And they're definitely, you can see that these themes were real. I mean, they're not made up themes.
Sure.
And then there was Saturn opposing Pluto in 1914, World War One. And then the American Civil War in 1861. It was a conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. So yeah, I mean, as I said, it's just a great way to understand the cycles of history. So we know what's going to be coming up, what's going to be ahead of us. Do you know what I mean? So right now we're still going through the change with the money and our resources. You know, that's still, Uranus is still in there, and because it's in Taurus as well, it relates to the Earth. So it can be things like radical, because Uranus is not predictable, radical Earth events.
Like earthquakes.
Correct.
Kind of thing.
Earthquakes, tidal waves, tsunamis, anything like that. And I'm sure I don't actually listen a lot to the news, but I believe there has been quite a few world events going on.
There's definitely been quite a few earthquakes going on around the world. I've been definitely looking at that.
Yeah. So it's definitely going on now. And that will go on until the end of this year, I think, if I'm correct. So what else have we got? We've got Saturn square Uranus between now and 2024. And that's really interesting because these planets, these are so different because, like I said, Uranus is about new things, new, exciting, the future, what's it going to be like? And the Saturn is old. It's like, hang on a second, I like tradition. I don't really want to move. I really like the way it is. Can we just keep it the way it is? So this aspect, and it's really interesting because what it encourages us to do is to actually find a way to compromise. How do we keep the traditions from the past that we find? Because we don't want to just throw the past out and say it's worth nothing. We can always take something from it. How do we blend those two things together so that we take the traditions from the past and we still look at the future and go, okay, so how do we mold these two things together? And that's what the current energy is that we're really looking at as on the globe, around the world. Do you know what I mean? So that's sort of a major thing.
And so we're going to maybe go through some upheaval this year. And
Definitely.
do we come to harmony next year? I've been waiting every year. It's like harmony this year.
Well, I mean, this is still that. I mean, I've got until the end of 2024. That's all I've done to date. I mean, this year I think we're still going to go through quite a bit of turbulence because we've still got that Pluto going back into Capricorn. We've still got Uranus going through, through Taurus. So I think there's still going to be a little bit more to go, basically. Because the people are going to be uprising. We're going to see revolution. People are going to be walking the streets like they did, you know, with the protests in the 1960s for the female rights and, you know, all these sorts of things. Do you know what I mean? And gay liberation recently and gay marriage and all that sort of thing. And so the people are going to be rising more. So we're probably going to see some riots and things, maybe. Can't predict it, but possibly
Okay,
the
we will
energy
see.
could be leading.
So is there anything else you'd like to cover about what you do, or relates to astrology?
Yeah.
What do you like to do? What is your passion?
So basically, I am a healer, and like I said, I don't use that word lightly, but I've been doing massage for 25 years, and so my hands have energy. Energy comes through my body, and my hands just know where to go on people's body. That's the healing that I do, or part of the healing that I do. Also, I think part of the healing happens with me is that it comes from the presence of just when my heart is open and joyous, that there's just a flow of healing that comes from that. So when people come, I offer retreats here in Bali, one-on-one retreats, people come and stay with me. Part of it is just being with me. Part of it is the massage in terms of the healing. And also I do astrological counselling as an aspect because it can really help people to see what's going on now. We can look at certain things. One of the things I also really love about astrology, just from my own experience, I made a decision when I turned 50, that from looking at my chart, I realized that my sun sits in the ninth house. The ninth house is what they call the house of God. It's sort of the second highest, and it's the house of philosophy and spiritual beliefs, technically. So I looked at it and I thought, well, this is my growth, right? The sun is me. So really I'm meant to be learning conscious growth. That's what I'm here for. So I looked at that and went, okay, well, that's why I'm here. So what do I need to do?
So you can serve others by helping them consciously grow.
Correct. And the North Node is the other thing to look at.
Right.
The North Node in astrology, it's not a planet, it's what we call an ecliptical point, but it relates to the North being the direction we're heading in, which is where we're heading in this lifetime. And it has an opposite point, the southern point. And that's where we've been in our previous lifetimes. So what tends to happen is we tend to have a natural inclination to go to what we know because it's comfortable. Even if intellectually we don't understand it, naturally our souls do have an understanding of what we know. So it'll be naturally that we'll blend towards ourselves. But if we understand that if we point our actions in the direction of our North Node, it can really help with our personal growth and give us a lot more fulfillment in terms of, like, if you're looking for my purpose, for example, what do I need to be doing? The North Node is part of understanding that, for sure. Like, for example, mine is in Gemini, which is communication. It's in the first house, which is me communicating.
Right.
So that's why I'm now starting to write my book as well.
Of course. Yes.
So
Writing your story.
yes,
sharing your
writing my story.
Which I'm passionate about that, having written my book and shared my personal story. And I think it's really great that more and more people seem to be wanting to write their story, because writing our personal stories and sharing it is just empowering everyone.
Totally.
And yeah, it's great. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah,
for sure.
and that's one of the reasons I need to write my book, I feel, too, is when I say I'm a healer, I have to write it because the number of things that challenges I've had in my life, which is also in my chart's actually a very complicated chart. There's a lot of what we call oppositions in my chart that I had to blend together. Is that I've overcome abandonment issues, I've overcome sexual abuse within the family, I've overcome rape, I've overcome anorexia, I've overcome narcissistic abuse and betrayal, I've overcome addiction, and I've pretty much found my own way through all these things, through my own healing process. You know, I mean, I've definitely reached out for help at times, but predominantly I've learned to find my own spiritual path. And I feel that, I think, can really help people to find their own spiritual path. Because I think the age of Aquarius that we're going into, going back to astrology, that's what it's about. It's about an individuated path. If each of us as individuals know authentically who we are, which is authenticity is also very Aquarius, then we could together as a humanity can really blend in this beautiful love, which is really the true essence of.
Sure. And it's through those challenges that, I mean, for me, they're a gift in our challenges.
Yes.
And when we come here to Earth, we're born, and we go through these difficult times to expand our consciousness, to expand even our sense of love, because contrast, through having these challenges, really difficult times, that shows us, that's how we learn, and that's how we grow, and that's how we become our authentic self. So
now we integrate those things that we've learned, but some people choose not to integrate them. That's the other side to the coin, because there's always free will, and we need to understand that. That's why we can never judge anyone else, because I can look at someone's chart, and that's nothing I want to say quickly about astrology. When I meet somebody and I get a feel for them, because I can pick up energy, and then I look at their chart and say they're telling me something, they're going, I'm like this, and I go, oh, I'm listening. And then look at the chart and go, yeah, that's a bit different. I will always believe the chart.
Right.
Because astrology, one thing I will tell you, it does not lie. It's very accurate. I've been studying it for very many years, 25 plus years. It's so exact when you look at the degrees and the numbers, and it just doesn't lie.
Okay, well, that's an interesting one. Come and have a reading. So how can people get in touch with you? Or you have Instagram, or what?
Yes.
How do they get in touch?
Instagram is probably the best way. Yeah. Instagram or via my website as well. I've got both.
And if you'd like to tell us what it's called.
The Instagram is Donna Grace Healer. And the website is donnagrace.com.au. Okay. But you can go on my bio on Instagram and the link to the website will be there. And I'd love to help people out.
Yeah, well, if you want to know more about astrology and have your chart read,
Or
here's
come for a-
Donna. Or come for a retreat in
retreat.
Bali. Why not?
I'll look
It's the
after
best
you.
place to be.
Yes.
That's where we live. So thanks for listening today, and I look forward to meeting you again on my next podcast.
Thanks, so.
Thank you for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like any further information about my work, you can contact me at travelwithalice.com.